Imagine this. The factories fall silent. The grocery store checkout lines are empty because the workers aren't there to scan your overpriced produce. The trucks that usually crawl along I 75, hauling goods from Detroit to Grand Rapids, sit idle. The gears of capitalism grind to a halt, not because the economy collapsed under its own absurd weight, though that's overdue, but because workers made a choice. They walked out. They refused to keep the machine running. That, my friends, is a general strike. Now, I want to be clear. A general strike isn't just a few pissed off baristas refusing to make lattes or factory workers throwing down their tools for a long weekend. This is an all out labor shutdown, a full system revolt where the working class refuses to feed the beast. And what happens when workers stop working? The bosses panic, the government scrambles, and the people, we either suffer or we organize. This is where mutual aid steps in. Mutual aid is not a radical new idea born out of Twitter discourse and the fever dreams of anarchists. It is older than capitalism itself. It predates unions, nonprofits, and the patronizing idea that the rich must share their excess scraps for the rest of us to survive. Mutual aid is survival. It is people taking care of each other when institutions refuse. The term was first seriously analyzed by Peter Kropotkin in his 1902 book, Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution. Kropotkin, a Russian prince turned anarchist, because who better to expose the ruling class than one of their own, studied how species, including humans, survive not by ruthless competition, but through cooperation. He torched the social Darwinist garbage, showing that history's most resilient communities weren't built on cutthroat individualism, but on collective support. Think about it. When your car breaks down in the dead of winter on some frozen stretch of road, you don't rely on the free market to save you. You rely on a stranger, another human, who stops to help. That's mutual aid in action. And in times of crisis, from labor strikes to natural disasters, mutual aid becomes the only thing standing between people and devastation. Now, let's put this into perspective. A general strike is one of the most powerful weapons workers have against the ruling class, but it's also one of the riskiest. The system is designed to make striking feel impossible. Rent is due, groceries aren't free, the utility company doesn't care about you fighting for a better world, they just want their check. This is why historically the most successful strikes have relied on mutual aid networks. During the 1934 Teamsters Strike in Minneapolis, working class neighborhoods organized food kitchens, medical aid, and strike funds to sustain themselves. Strikers weren't just demanding better wages, they were actively proving that they could build something better than what the bosses provided. During the 1969 Black Panther Free Breakfast for Children program, mutual aid fed thousands of hungry kids while the government dragged its feet on basic welfare programs. The state saw this as such a threat that J. Edgar Hoover himself labeled it one of the biggest dangers to American stability. Think about that. Feeding kids was seen as a revolutionary act because it exposed the government's and capitalism's failure. Now, apply that to a general strike. If mutual aid networks can sustain striking workers, provide food, medical care, financial assistance, and community defense, then the fear mongering loses its power. The bosses lose their leverage. The media narrative that striking means starving your family collapses. And this isn't hypothetical. Mutual aid groups already exist across Michigan. Metro Detroit Mutual Aid is actively training people in survival logistics. Grand Rapids Area Mutual Aid Network is redistributing resources without bureaucratic red tape. Mutual Aid of Northwest Michigan is proving that even rural communities can build self-sufficiency outside of capitalist structures. These are not charity groups. They do not operate on a billionaire's handouts or performative goodwill. These are working class people helping other working class people, building the kind of real solidarity that terrifies the ruling elite. So here's the playbook for today's episode. I'm going to break down the mutual aid networks already operating in Michigan. I'm going to show how they've sustained workers and communities in times of crisis. And I'm going to make that case that without a strong mutual aid infrastructure, a general strike is impossible. But with one, it is unstoppable. Because in the end, that's what this is about. The system survives because we are forced to rely on it. Mutual aid proves we don't have to. And when the day comes that we walk out for a day, a week, or however long it takes, the only thing that will determine whether we win or lose isn't how mad we are at the bosses. It's whether we're ready to take care of each other. Let's get into it. The rich love to sell you the myth that the strong survive by stepping on the weak. They want you to believe that capitalism is some kind of Darwinian ecosystem where only the best competitors make it out alive. That's the social Darwinist fantasy, a fever dream cooked up by the ruling class to justify why they hoard wealth while the rest of us fight over crumbs. But the truth? The wealthy survive because they cooperate. That's what Peter Kropotkin spent years proving when he wrote Mutual Aid, a Factor of Evolution in 1902. Kropotkin wasn't just some radical philosopher ranting in a smoky basement. He was a scientist, a geographer, a guy who actually went out into the Siberian wilderness and studied how living things endure hardship. And what he found shattered the social Darwinist propaganda. Survival isn't about crushing your competition, it's about helping each other. Kropotkin's research showed that the most successful species weren't the ones that tore each other apart. They were the ones that would work together. Wolves hunt in packs, birds travel in flocks. Early humans built communities to protect and feed each other. The idea that individual struggle is the only way forward? That's a capitalist con job designed to keep us isolated and afraid. And this concept doesn't just apply to animals or ancient tribes. It applies to working class resistance. Let's fast forward to the early 20th century, when the industrial world was a capitalist hellscape. The work was brutal. The hours were endless. The wages were criminal. If you got hurt on the job, you weren't just out of work. You were out of luck. No health care, no benefits, just a broken body and a pat on the back. Weird how things haven't changed much, huh? So what did workers do then? Well, they didn't wait around for the bosses to grow consciences. They built their own safety nets. In Minneapolis in 1934, Teamsters went on strike. The trucking companies thought they could starve them out, break them down, and send them crawling back to work. But they underestimated the power of mutual aid. Workers' families set up community kitchens, medical tents, and financial relief funds to make sure no one went hungry or homeless during the strike. The strike held strong, and the workers won. This wasn't charity, it was power. Fast forward to 1969, and you see the same principle at work in the Black Panthers Party's Free Breakfast for Children program. The Panthers saw what capitalism and racism were doing to their communities. Hungry kids, neglected families, systemic poverty. So they stepped in. They fed thousands of children before school every single day. proving that mutual aid wasn't just about survival, it was about building an alternative to a failed system. And guess what? The US government saw that as a direct threat. J. Edgar Hoover himself called the program one of the biggest dangers to American stability. Not their guns, not their protests, their breakfast program. Because when people take care of each other without permission, it exposes how little the system actually does for them. That's what makes mutual aid dangerous. It makes the ruling class irrelevant. Now, let's be clear, mutual aid is not charity. Charity is when a billionaire writes a check for a tax break and slaps their name on a hospital wing. Charity is when a nonprofit makes you fill out 10 forms to prove you're poor enough to deserve help. Charity is a system built on gatekeeping and hierarchy, designed to remind you that you are powerless at the mercy of those who give. Mutual aid is different. Mutual aid says, we take care of us. No means testing, no bureaucratic hoops to jump through, no one deciding who is worthy of support. Mutual aid is solidarity, not charity. It's working class people making sure other working class people have what they need because no one else is going to do it. Dean Spade breaks it down in Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next, a book that should be required reading for anyone serious about organizing. He lays out exactly why mutual aid must be grassroots, decentralized, and free from the corruption of corporate money. Because the second you start begging for handouts from the same system that's screwing you, you're already losing. That's why mutual aid networks reject hierarchy. They're horizontal, meaning decisions are made collectively. Resources are shared without red tape, and there's no leader controlling the flow of support. And this model isn't just some utopian dream, it's already working. Right now, in Michigan, Metro Detroit Mutual Aid is training people in disaster response and survival logistics. Grand Rapids Area Mutual Aid Network is redistributing food, supplies, and housing support without bureaucracy. Mutual Aid of Northwest Michigan is proving that even in rural areas, people can build self-sufficient alternatives to capitalist dependency. If we're serious about a nationwide general strike, mutual aid is not optional. It's essential. Think about it. If workers stop getting paid, mutual aid provides food and rent assistance. If healthcare workers walk out, mutual aid connects people to community clinics and first aid training. If supply chains break down, mutual aid networks ensure goods are redistributed where they're needed. The ruling class wants you to believe that striking is impossible because they control the food, the housing, the infrastructure. But mutual aid takes those weapons out of their hands. A general strike without mutual aid collapses in a week. A general strike with mutual aid can last indefinitely. That's why the next segment, I'll dive into the mutual aid networks already in place across Michigan, the ones that are laying the groundwork for real, sustained resistance. Because when the system fails, mutual aid wins. Let's keep going. A general strike without mutual aid is a war without supplies. It's a battle without reinforcements. It's walking into a fight thinking that your enemy will play fair. The capitalist class relies on the idea that we can't take care of each other. They bank on the assumption that without their paychecks, without their overpriced grocery stores, without their corrupt institutions, we crumble. They need us desperate. They need us isolated. Mutual aid blows that whole game apart. It's the safety net that capitalism pretends to be. And in Michigan, that net is already being woven, reinforced, and ready to hold the weight of a general strike. Right now, mutual aid networks are operating from Detroit to the Upper Peninsula, redistributing food, securing shelter, offering financial support, and making sure the people who have been left behind by this system aren't waiting around for a rescue that will never come. These aren't charities, they're survival networks. So, let's break it down by region. No matter where you are in Michigan, there's a mutual aid group fighting to keep people alive. Detroit has always been a battleground for working class survival. The labor struggles, the union fights, the factory shutdowns. This city has seen it all. And every time capitalism abandoned it, the people of Detroit took care of each other. That legacy continues today with some of the most well-organized mutual aid networks in the state. Metro Detroit Mutual Aid isn't just about handing out food. They're training people in survival logistics. That means knowing how to distribute resources effectively, how to handle emergencies when the system fails, and how to keep entire communities afloat when the economy decides they're expendable. Michigan Mutual Aid Coalition is another prominent organization. Forget corporate-funded nonprofits. Those waste money on CEO salaries and useless PR campaigns. Michigan Mutual Aid Coalition is direct action, worker-led, and built to support movements. When strikes happen, when workplaces shut down, when workers need backup, they show up. Hamtramck Mutual Aid and East Side Mutual Aid are groups that operate hyper-locally, meaning they know exactly what their communities need. This isn't some top-down organization deciding what's best from an office miles away. These are neighbors supporting neighbors, making sure no one falls through the cracks. For the People Mutual Aid prioritizes underserved communities. This network makes sure that mutual aid isn't for the most visible or vocal, it's for the people capitalism ignores completely. No red tape, no barriers, just help. Now, not every major labor struggle happens in the big cities. From factory towns to college campuses, workers in central Michigan are just as vulnerable to economic instability. And that's where these groups step in. Lansing Area Mutual Aid. In a city that houses Michigan's government, you'd think people wouldn't need mutual aid. But capitalism doesn't care if you live next to the Capitol. People still go hungry. This network focuses on housing security and food distribution, ensuring that the working class isn't left behind while politicians argue about policy. East Lansing Neighbors and Communities Help Each Other is a group that helps vulnerable populations. College towns like East Lansing create a unique kind of economic instability. Students live on razor-thin margins, campus workers are underpaid, and the moment someone loses their job, there's no safety net. This network steps in to fill the gaps, connecting people with resources quickly, efficiently, and without bureaucratic nonsense of traditional aid. The west side of the state has long been seen as a different beast from Detroit or Lansing. But that doesn't mean that the working class there isn't struggling or that they aren't organizing. Grand Rapids Area Mutual Aid Network. They aren't just a food bank. They operate under an explicitly anti-oppressive framework, meaning they don't just help, they fight. They understand that poverty, job insecurity, and homelessness are built into this system. Their mission isn't just to patch holes, it's to tear down the structures that create those holes in the first place. West Michigan Mutual Aid Network is a broader coalition dedicated to housing insecure individuals and redistributing resources effectively. The west side of the state might not see the same mass mobilization as Detroit, but these groups are proving that mutual aid is just as vital in smaller communities. Now, proving that rural communities can organize is one of the biggest challenges because they can't. It's a big lie that capital spreads that says that they can't. They want us to believe that if you don't live in a big city, you're on your own, and that's utter bullshit. Mutual Aid of Northwest Michigan is a rapidly growing initiative focused on community interdependence. These organizers understand that rural poverty is real and that waiting for government help is like waiting for rain in the desert. They've built a network that connects people in crisis with direct, fast, and meaningful support. While local networks are essential, some mutual aid efforts need to operate statewide. These initiatives aren't tied to one city or region. They're available to workers and communities across Michigan. Michigan Alliance of Time Banks is a system that facilitates skill and service exchanges across the state. Instead of relying on cash, people trade labor, knowledge, and resources directly. Need a repair? Offer a service in return. It's the closest thing to a post-capitalist barter economy that we have. Michigan Black Mama's bailout directly supports incarcerated Black mothers, ensuring that cash bail doesn't become a death sentence for struggling families. If the system is going to criminalize poverty, mutual aid will dismantle that weapon piece by piece. A general strike doesn't win because of slogans. It wins because people can survive without bosses. And in Michigan, that infrastructure for that survival is already being built. We don't need to wait for permission. We just need to use what's already there. Because the next time we walk out, we're not coming back. Not until we win. Let's keep going. Let's be clear. A general strike is a war. Not the kind fought with bullets and bombs, but the kind waged on grocery shelves, rent payments, and the unshakable fear that if you don't clock in, you won't eat. That's how capitalism keeps people in line, by making survival a privilege, not a right. This is why mutual aid isn't just helpful in a general strike, it's the only way a general strike lasts longer than a weekend. Because when the bosses lock you out, when the government turns a blind eye, when the police do what they have always done, which is protect property over people, the only thing that determines whether a strike holds or collapses is whether workers can take care of each other. So, let's get tactical. Here's how mutual aid becomes the backbone of an unstoppable general strike. The first question that the ruling class asks whenever the workers threaten to strike is simple. How will they eat? They expect the answer to be simply that we won't. Capitalism is designed to make food, housing, healthcare, and transportation dependent on a paycheck. If the workers walk out, they assume we'll starve ourselves back into submission. Mutual aid says otherwise. Let's start with food distribution. When traditional supply chains break down in a general strike, mutual aid networks take over. Instead of food rotting in corporate warehouses, it goes where it's needed. We've seen this in action during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Buffalo Mutual Aid Network coordinated food deliveries to thousands who lost work overnight. Now, how about housing support? Eviction defense networks, rapid response rent assistance, and squatting movements ensure that no one is thrown out onto the street for daring to fight for a living wage. Now, let's take a look at medical aid. When healthcare workers strike, mutual aid groups organize first aid stations, distribute medications, and train people in basic emergency care. Finally, there's transportation. If bus drivers strike, mutual aid fills the gap with community ride shares. If gas prices are used as a weapon to break the strike, fuel sharing networks make sure essential travel doesn't become a burden. Capitalism's greatest lie is that we need it to survive. We don't. We only need each other. Now, every general strike eventually hits the financial wall. How long can workers hold out before the bills pile up? Before landlords start circling like the vultures they are? Historically, unions ran strike funds, pools of money collected from members' dues set aside to help keep workers afloat during longer fights. But in today's gig economy, where employers deliberately keep workers independent just to avoid unionization, we need a new model. So, how about decentralized financial assistance? Venmo, Cash App, GoFundMe, direct aid networks. Mutual aid takes money out of corporate hands and redistributes it immediately. The Chicago Teachers Union strike in 2019 saw mass crowdfunding campaigns to keep educators and support staff from financial ruin. Then there's gig worker support. Rideshare drivers, food delivery workers, and freelancers don't have traditional strike funds, but mutual aid groups create emergency grants and direct cash assistance to keep them in the fight. Then there's community microloans. Some mutual aid networks set up interest-free loans repaid only when the recipient is financially stable, turning debt from a weapon into a lifeline. The capitalist class expects hunger and debt to break a strike. But when mutual aid networks keep food on the table and money in the workers' pockets, that leverage disappears. So, how do we protect the strike from the state? Because police do not exist to protect the public. They exist to protect capital. Historically, cops have been the strike breakers of last resort. In 1892, Pinkertons opened fire on striking steelworkers in Homestead, Pennsylvania. In 1914, the Colorado National Guard machine gunned striking miners and their families. In 1932, Dearborn Police and Henry Ford's private goons opened fire on strikers. In 2020, police in major cities attacked mutual aid groups distributing medical aid during protests. In a general strike, expect police intervention. Expect intimidation, arrests, and outright violence. That's why mutual aid must include community safety. When striking workers are arrested, mutual aid networks provide bail funds and legal defense. During the 2020 uprisings, groups like Portland Mutual Aid coordinated rapid response jail support, getting protesters out before the state could make an example of them. Co-op-free response teams. Strikebreakers thrive on chaos and fear. Community-led safety teams modeled after Cop Watch and the Black Panthers patrols ensure that neighborhoods remain protected without state intervention. Medical response. Street medics, mobile clinics, and trauma response teams operate in high-risk zones, ensuring that when police escalate, workers have the tools to fight back and recover. If the state wants to turn a general strike into a battlefield, mutual aid will make sure workers don't fight it alone. And that's the most important thing: solidarity. Capitalism doesn't just rely on coercion, it relies on control over infrastructure. They own the supply chains, they own the grocery stores, they own the energy grids, the hospitals, the internet. And if the strike goes on long enough, they will use that control to force workers back into submission. Unless, of course, mutual aid networks already have alternatives in place. Food redistribution and community kitchens, for instance. The Puerto Rican truckers' strike of 2018 saw corporate supply chains freeze, but community led food redistribution efforts ensured that people didn't starve. Then there's worker owned cooperatives. If businesses refuse to operate in solidarity with the strike, workers can seize the means of production themselves. Worker run farms, grocery collectives, and pop up markets create independent food supply chains. Then, of course, there's the community power grids. The Texas freeze of 2021 proved that capitalist run utilities will let people freeze to death before losing profit. Mutual aid networks have already begun experimenting with local solar power grids, off the grid heating, and decentralized energy production. Now let's look at medical co ops. Instead of relying on corporate healthcare, community clinics and mobile medics can provide essential services. A general strike isn't just about stopping capitalism, it's about proving that we don't need it. If workers strike without mutual aid, we lose before the fight even begins. Because capitalism is a parasite. It only survives if we remain dependent on it. The moment we realize we don't need their jobs, their food, their supply chains, their overpriced apartments, their corporate hospitals, the moment we prove we can build something better, it's over. That's why this system fights so hard against mutual aid, why the FBI targeted the Black Panthers for feeding children, why disaster relief is privatized, why they smear striking workers as selfish, all while calling us the working class because they know they are the lazy class. They need us, we don't need them. They don't want you to know that a general strike isn't just possible, it's survivable. And when we survive without them, we win. Mutual aid doesn't just magically appear when people need it. It isn't some spontaneous feel good charity drive. It's built intentionally, deliberately, and strategically. If a general strike is war, mutual aid is the logistics department. And like any resistance movement, it needs planning, coordination, and a clear understanding of the battlefield. Make no mistake, the ruling class will fight mutual aid just as hard as they fight unions. They know that if we can feed, house, and protect each other without them, we don't need them. So, let's break it down. How do you build a mutual aid network that can survive a crisis and outlast capitalism itself? Step 1: identify needs. The first mistake of ineffective mutual aid groups, they assume needs instead of asking. If you want a mutual aid network that actually works, you start with the people. Conduct surveys, go door to door, set up online forms, ask people what their biggest barriers to survival are. Rent, food, transportation, medical care. You don't plan until you know. Hold community meetings. Mutual aid is about relationships. People need to know who they're working with, who they can rely on, and what skills exist within their neighborhoods. Map out vulnerabilities. Where are the food deserts? Who's at risk of eviction? Who has no access to reliable transportation? Know your terrain before you move. Step 2. Decentralize operations. Mutual aid is not a nonprofit. It's not a corporate charity with a board of directors who hoard donations while workers get breadcrumbs. It's a horizontal, people powered structure. That means no one person makes the rules. Decisions are made collectively, and no one hoards power. Localize everything. Every neighborhood block and apartment complex should have its own mini network that operates semi independently. The goal is self sufficiency, not bureaucracy. Avoid red tape. No means testing, no applications. If someone needs help, they get it. Full fucking stop. The government and big nonprofits love to slow things down with regulations, paperwork, and hoops to jump through. Mutual aid moves fast because survival can't wait. Step 3. Resource sharing. Capitalism controls people by controlling resources. So, mutual aid networks have to redistribute those resources directly. Here's how. Plug into existing networks. Michigan already has the Michigan Mutual Aid Coalition, Grand Rapids Area Mutual Aid Network, and hyper-local groups across the state. Don't reinvent the wheel. Coordinate. Stockpile essentials, food, medicine, diapers, winter gear. Start collecting now. The worst time to build a supply chain is when the crisis has already hit. Establish drop points. Churches, libraries, community centers, any place that can function as a resource hub should be one. Crowdfund aggressively. Mutual aid cannot rely on billionaire scraps. Fundraising should come from the community, from the small dollar donors, from skilled trades, the barter system. Keep it people powered. And most importantly, redistribute without delay. The goal isn't to sit on a pile of resources, it's to get them into the hands of the people who need them now. Step 4. Prepare for resistance. If you think they're just going to let us take care of each other, you are delusional. There's not a chance in the world. History has proven that when mutual aid works too well, it gets criminalized. The Black Panthers' free breakfast program, labeled a threat to national security by J. Edgar Hoover. Mutual aid efforts feeding the homeless? Well, they routinely get shut down by police in multiple states. Disaster relief efforts that bypass the government? Targeted with legal crackdowns to force reliance on state approved charities. So, if you're serious about mutual aid, you need to be ready for legal barriers. Some cities ban feeding the homeless. Some states require ridiculous permits for free clinics. Know the laws, but more importantly, know when to ignore them. Media smear campaigns. Expect the press to frame mutual aid groups as radicals, criminals, or a public nuisance. Stay ahead of the narrative by being louder and more visible than they are. Police harassment. If the state sees your mutual aid group as a threat, they will find ways to disrupt it. Document everything. Have legal support. Know your rights. This isn't paranoia, it's history. If your mutual aid network is actually effective, at some point, you will become a target. You don't build a lifeboat after the ship is sinking, though. You build it before. Mutual aid isn't just for strikes, it's for climate disasters, economic collapses, state failures, and all of those things are already happening. If we're going to survive the next crisis, the next strike, the next moment the system abandons us, we need to be ready. Because if we don't take care of each other, no one else will. So get started. Organize your block. Build your network. Join the ones already in motion. Because when the general strike comes, it's mutual aid that decides whether we win or lose. And I don't know about you, but I don't plan on losing. The only way I'm leaving is dead. I've spent this episode breaking down why mutual aid is essential, how it operates, and where it's already thriving across Michigan. But theory isn't enough, because at the end of the day, it's not about knowing, it's about doing. This isn't a history lesson. This isn't an abstract idea. This is survival, organization, and power. And the only thing that separates a hypothetical general strike from a successful one is whether the people are ready to move. So, here's the final takeaway. Mutual aid networks already exist in Michigan. You don't have to start from scratch. You just have to find them and get involved. Other states as well. A general strike is impossible without infrastructure. Capitalism survives because we depend on it. Mutual aid is how we break that dependence. Labor and mutual aid must work together. Strikes are not won by slogans alone. They're won when workers can survive without bosses, and that only happens if we organize beyond our workplaces. Capitalism wants us isolated. It wants us dependent. It wants us too scared to fight back. Mutual aid proves we don't need them. And the moment we prove that, they lose. Solidarity is survival. Mutual aid is power. Eyes open, voices loud.